Hi guys, this is Elliot here with the British Esports Association, and today I'm going to help show you how to build a computer. Okay, so first of all we're just going to go through a quick component list. First up is the power supply. This is a 500 watt. This is the little box it comes in, and I'll just show you quickly what it looks like inside. So it's a nice black rectangle box, and it has a lot of cables coming out the side of it. Next up we have the graphics card. Here it is. This is the GTX 1060. It's the 3GB version, and that's what it looks like outside its box, and here's its box. So the next one we have is the Ryzen 5. It's the 2600X. This is the actual chip, and it comes in this box. Also included in this box is the cooler, which looks like this. I'm going to leave it in its packet for now. Next up we have the Gigabyte SSD. It's 240 gigs, and it comes in a packet that looks like that.
Okay, so this is the motherboard. It is from Gigabyte, and it is the B450M. Its version is the DS3H. What we need to mention here is the size, and it's a microATX board, which is the standard size of motherboard for medium-sized cases, which is what we've got here.
Finally, we have the Vengeance Corsair RAM. This is 16 gig, and it comes in 2 sticks of 8, and that's what they look like out of the packet. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need is some screwdrivers. I've just got a couple of sets here. One's a ratchet, and then this one is a special computer set. They're very cheap, but largely you're only going to need one, just a Phillips head with a bit of length on it. So that's what you're going to need. The first job is to take the case apart. So we need to take both sides off the case, which is just done by undoing these hand screws at the back. Make sure you put those to one side so you don't lose them. And then all you do is just slide the case doors off and put them out the way for now. Okay, so here we have the frame. It's best to lie this down at this point so that you can see what's going on from a top view. The first job is to take out the case screws, which are normally kept somewhere inside the case in a little box, and just take those out. Once you've got the case screws, you need to take those out of the packet, and then there's one that we need to put in, which will help support the motherboard in the long run. So the first job is to install the motherboard. The motherboard goes here, and we can just line it up visually without touching anything. We just hold it by the sides. We can just visually estimate roughly where it's going to go. Now, putting that to one side, you can see that there are lots of screws on the case. This is where the motherboard is going to be screwed into. However, due to the size of this motherboard, we need an extra pin, which looks like this. This one is going to screw into this hole here, just to give our motherboard a bit of extra support. You can just do it by hand. The next job is to just install the back plate. This comes with the motherboard. It's normally found underneath in the packet, and it goes along the back here underneath this rear fan. So I'm going to install it now with the 3 holes what would be facing the bottom of the case. And just pop it into place. Once that's in place, we can now install the motherboard. So take care, and we're lining up. Most importantly, there is a hole here in the motherboard, and this needs to go on top of this pipe. So we're going to line it up as so. There we go. As you can see, the pipe has come through, and now we need to screw it into place. The case screws came with a lot of bags, but we need to find the ones that are the right size. They normally come with 3, big set, middle set, a little set. For this one it's the middle set, and we need 4. So it's best if I just pull this up, I think. The screws are going to go into this hole, and then 2 at the top, 1 in the corner and 1 above this stick here. Okay, so the next part is prepping for the chip to go in. So this is a little lever that releases the catch, so all we need to do is just pull the lever up and that releases the catch. Now, the chip, you have to be very careful not to touch it. We're just trying to grab it by the corners because we don't want to get any grease on it or any kind of dust and stuff. The other thing to note about the chip is that on one of the corners there is a little triangle. It's this corner here, and this must correspond. There's a little triangle on the corner of the chipboard here, so they must line up exactly. The chip itself should just drop straight into place, and then once it's in place, just lock it back in place with the lever. The next thing we need to do is to take these plastic coverings off to release the holes, because then we're going to screw the cooler in on top of the chip. So I'm just going to do that now. Okay, so once those are removed, you'll notice that you can see these big 4 holes here. So these are the holes that the processor cooler is going to screw into. There is a back plate here, and this is actually what the screws go into. So we need to hold it from underneath with one hand while simultaneously screwing into these holes. This is somewhat difficult because on the back of it is the chip. Now this is what we must avoid. So even when I put the back plate on, it's still exposed. So I have to grip the back plate using just 2 fingers like that, whilst at the same time screwing in here. So this thermal paste is very sticky. I'm going to just try and rub that on a little bit just to make sure that it all gels nicely. I'm also trying very hard to line it up nicely so that the screws should go in first time. That looks pretty good to me. So, I'm just going to tuck this cable out of the way, and then I'm going to get one screw in. Once I've felt the first screw bite, I'm then going to move to the opposite screw and make sure that that one goes in safely as well. Might need a little bit of readjusting just to make sure that those screw heads line up. All the while, make sure you're holding that back plate. It requires a little bit of pressure to get it to make that first bite. Okay, so all 4 screws are now biting. So I'm just going to go around them all. I can put it flat now and just tighten them all up. Okay, so that's the hardest part done. Alright, so the next part I'm going to install is the RAM. It comes in this little packet. So these go into these rows here. Now, on the board, you can see it's here. It shows you which slot corresponds to which number. So this is 1, this is 3, this is 2, and this is 4. We need them in slots 1 and 2, and they've thankfully color-coded them grey for us so that we know that they're paired. I'm going to install them now. To do that, you just release these clips, and then just slot it in and then push it down until you hear the click. There we go. And do the same with the second one. Notice that these clips now come in and they look identical to the rest of them. That's the RAM installed. Okay, so next up I'm going to do the power supply. It's going to sit here at the bottom of the case underneath the motherboard, and to do that I just need to take the whole unit, make sure that this is facing the back and the fan is facing the bottom, just like that. Don't worry too much about the cables, we'll come to them later. It just has 4 screws that need to go in to keep it in place. Okay, that's now the power supply installed. So now the RAM is in place, the next component we're going to install is the graphics card. To install the graphics card, we're going to need to take off these back panels. To do that, we need to first take out these 2 screws and then 2 of these plates, which correspond to the second and the third one, so that's this one and this one. Once you've removed the plates, just set these aside because we won't need those anymore. The graphics card will actually take its place. So, remove the graphics card from its packaging, taking care not to touch any of this side of the board. We're very safe to touch any of the plastic on the front. What we need to do now is remove these plugs from the back. Just simply pull them out. And then we also need to remove this rubber protective casing here and the plastic sleeve that is surrounding. You can put all that to one side because we're not going to use it for the rest of the build. Now, these 2 panels here are going to replace the plates that we've just removed. So what we need to do is to slide the graphics card into the slot that they came from. Just like so. Once it's in place, make sure again we push it down until we hear a nice satisfying click that it's locked in place. Okay, once the graphics card is seated properly, we now need to just screw it back in using the same screws that we took out a moment ago in the exact same holes. It might help if you just push the graphics card to give yourself a bit of leeway if the screws don't line up properly. Once those are in place, you can then replace the plate. Well done! So far we've got the processor in, the cooler in, the graphics card in and the RAM in, and the power supply. So the only thing we have left to install now is our memory, which is the SSD, and then of course we need to plug everything into the motherboard so that it all connects. Okay, so now we're going to install the SSD. This is the last part, this is our storage. So to do that, we need to actually attach it to one of these cables. Now it is this one. I'm just going to try and hold it up to the camera there to show you. And it lines up nicely here at the side of the SSD. It only goes in one way and it just clips in like that.
Okay, so we just forgot one thing. We need to plug the SSD into the motherboard. To do that, we need the SATA cable, which is found inside the motherboard case. It comes with the motherboard, and it plugs into the SSD right next to where we plugged in the power. And then on the motherboard, the other end plugs in next to the front panel connectors. It's shown on the image as you see there.
Now the next thing we need to do is to secure it, and it screws on to one of these platforms. It has 4 holes that line up nicely with the back of the SSD, so we'll just screw that in now. Okay, and once you've screwed it in nicely, just pop it back in like so. You might find it easier just to tuck the cables away behind it as well. Okay, so we've finally come to more or less the end of the actual build. Now it's just time to plug everything in. So first of all, I'm going to start with the power. We need to give everything power. So the biggest one is the power to the motherboard. and that's literally 24 pins right here, and it goes in, if I show that's about as close as I can get to the camera, and it goes in this slot here, which is also 24 pins. It's the only one that fits there, so just try and get that in as best as you can. The next cable that we're going to plug in is the power to the processor, and that is on this one here. You know it's the processor because it says CPU on it. And it plugs in at the very top of the motherboard, just down there. Okay, that one's in nice and firm. The next one we're going to plug in is the graphics card, and this one is labelled PCIe, which stands for PCI Express, and it's a 6-pin, and it plugs in here on the graphics card. So just to clarify, we plugged in power to the motherboard, power to the processor unit, power to the graphics card, and power to our SSD. Now, we also have these extra cables that are supplied by the power supply. Now, these can be used to plug in excess hard drives or external hard drives, other hard drives that you might want to put into these slots here. So this can be used for future upgrades, whether they're solid state hard drives like this one or whether they're just normal. Okay, but for now I'm just going to tuck those cables out of the way. There's two more things we need to do. We need to plug in our fans. We have one here and another one on the CPU. Both of the cables for the fans are attached to the fans themselves. This one, which is the processor fan, plugs in at the very top, right next to the sticks of RAM. So I'm just going to tuck that round and plug that in just there. Now the other fan, which is the rear case fan, has one just below it, and it is labelled sys fan, and that one just plugs in as well. So those are the fans. Make sure you tuck the cables out the way so that they don't get trapped when the fans start to work. Finally, we have one more lot of things to plug in, and that is the front panel. So the front panel consists of all of your power buttons, your reset buttons, and your USB ports. And they came installed in the case. There are a nice bunch of cables that are just tied to the back. Just release the tie and then pull them out to have a look at them. So we have the USB, and we have the audio, and then all of these are the power and the lights and the reset button. So they all plug in at the bottom of the motherboard below the graphics card. So first of all, I'm just going to plug in the audio and put the rest over there. Again, they only go in one way. Lovely. I'm going to do these little individual ones next because I think they're more fiddly. So, each of these has a positive and a negative side. They're all labelled, which should go in which pin. And they all correspond on the board itself, on the motherboard. They show you exactly which one is the positive and which one is the negative. So I'm just going to plug those in now. That's quite fiddly, but once you're done, the last one to plug in is the USB ports, and it's a nice easy big one. It literally goes in the slot that says USB. Okay, and that is it. So all we need to do now, stand it back up, and we'll put the sides back on. And that's it, complete. So once we're finished, all we need to do now is get a power cable and a monitor, plug it in, and check it works. If you have any questions, feel free to give me an email. I'm Elliot Bond, I'm the Schools and Colleges Liaison Officer. And also feel free to check out our website at britishesports.org. Thank you very much.